Watching Kyle's unboxing videos again?
Yeah, he always finds the coolest... No way! A robot dog? Gotta ask where he got it.
Or use your Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. Just draw a circle around the dog on your screen, and it shows you where to buy it right in the app.
Whoa, I just learned a new trick. And that for once, I beat Kyle to the next big thing.
Circle it, find it with the new Galaxy S24 Ultra and circle the search with Google. Get yours now at Samsung.com. Internet connection required. Results may vary based on visuals.
This episode is brought to you by Pepsi Wild Cherry. Pepsi Wild Cherry is bursting with delicious cherry flavor and a sweet, crisp taste that gives you more to go wild for. Getting wild may look different these days, but whether it's opting for a solo Friday binge watch or a big night out, everyone can indulge in their wild side with Pepsi Wild Cherry. Also available in Zero Sugar. So grab a Pepsi Wild Cherry and get wild.
Hey guys, it is Ryan. I'm not sure if you know this about me, but I'm a bit of a fun fanatic when I can. I like to work, but I like fun too. It's a thing. And now the truth is out there. I can tell you about my favorite place to have fun. Chumba Casino. They have hundreds of social casino style games to choose from with new games released each week. You can play for free anytime, anywhere. And each day brings a new chance to collect daily bonuses. So join me in the fun. Sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Hey guys, how you doing? This is Mick Tully for World of Martial Arts Television yet again with my dear friend Will Henshaw, and I'm going to have to preempt this today because the gentleman that we're speaking to, I'm a bit of a fanboy of. I was explaining it to Will Henshaw. I first noticed this gentleman back in the 80s when he was on the cover of a couple of magazines in the UK, and his story piqued my interest. And it's if you don't know who this gentleman is, shame on you guys. It's the legendary one and only Mr. Danny Lane. So Master Danny Lane. Danny, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Today we're going to be talking initially about your links with the World Bushido Federation and why you've joined it, and what's the remit behind it, or what does that actually do?
Well, the World Bushido Federation was a vision of Jorge down in Honduras, and he got a hold of me, and he wanted to, I guess, develop this organization like no other. It would have the best champions, movie stars, the world's greatest masters from all the countries. That's never been done before. He wanted to bring this under the umbrella of being a traditional art, but at the same time innovate into the technology and everything we have today. So it's kind of like tradition meets innovation, and we wanted to make this like the Oscars of the world of the martial arts federations. We wanted to have all the stars, the masters, and everybody on one page, have a certificate and everything that would acknowledge the people around the world, from the best people in the world. And and his vision is to unite everybody in the world under one charter, at least in this organization. So it will be kind of an entertaining and a training type of federation where we'll have a lot of online databases for training clips. We already have about 1,000 training clips from different masters and other people that's donated those that we have in our database. We want to be able to certify rank in different styles and different systems. We want to be able to authorize people and bring them forward. Now, our standards will be very high because our board of directors will have to verify and authorize all the people who want to be in and get this beautiful certificate that's been developed that's like no other. So we're bringing together, like I said, it's kind of like the Oscars of martial arts. Instead of just a Hall of Fame, which there are many of those, there's probably 50 around the world, of different Hall of Fames in different countries and different states and so forth. We want to have something that's worldwide, that's a person's recognized all through the world with this federation. So it's going to be an elite type of organization, online, virtual, and then we have some world events being planned right now in different countries.
In my research looking for it, some of the names that are connected were impressive. Higa Machado, Richard Norton, yourself. In this environment at the moment where, especially with social media, there seems to be more dissent in martial arts than, this brotherhood, this fellowship, which is what I got into martial arts for in the beginning. There seems to be more division than ever. So is that one of the factors behind getting the Bushido Federation together, getting everyone on the same page?
Well, it's very difficult to do because we live in different countries. A lot of us speak different languages, so we have to use Google Translator. And, it's a monumental task, but, it's been underway now for about 6 or 8 months, just online and contacting people. And Kyle Green, who's the logistics part of this and the vice president of the organization, under our charter, he's just great on organizing people and communicating with people and going behind the scenes, making all this happen. We have people in Bangkok, Thailand, that's reaching out to people, one of our affiliates over there. There's a world gym being built there that's supposedly, we don't have a contract yet, being built for the Bushido Federation, also my World Martial Arts Federation. It's in the progress, and it's supposed to be finished.
It's quite interesting because I noticed that Master Toddy, who used to be in the UK, who's a legend in Muay Thai, he was connected as well. It was like the more research I did, the more people I found that I was like, how did they get involved? So how did you initially get contacted to become part of this?
Well, Jorge from Honduras, the CEO and his division, when it initially started this, he reached out to me, and unknowing to me, just like you, he knew of me many, many years ago and had my videos and stuff, and had become a fan of mine, and he wanted to reach out to me. I mean, his story is a little bit like mine. He has been shot 18 times on the streets of Honduras, and I guess he's been in law enforcement, and he's been on the front lines like I have as a Marine in Vietnam and also as a police officer. So, we've actually experienced a real combat in situations, being shot, knowing what it takes to survive, not only mentally but psychologically and emotionally, and getting over these things, and still living to talk about it. So my vision is the same as his. We want to have reality combat and reality martial arts, but at the same time, we want to keep it traditional too. That's why I said when tradition meets innovation, we want everything a bit traditional that brought us all forward to this point. But in the end, all of us still teach reality martial arts, which is real world martial arts. So we're not going to abandon the tradition because we all come from that. But we want to be able to bring it forward into. That's why I'm a president of the Police Tactics Instructors of America. We have 1,300 members worldwide, and I still teach martial arts to law enforcement agencies around the world. Now we have instructors in 25 different countries teaching police defensive tactics to law enforcement, military, and the private sector.
But you see, this is the thing. In your initial interviews back in the 80s, it was Combat. I think it was Combat Magazine was the first one, and then I know you were in Martial Arts Illustrated as well in the UK. And I found reading about you it was a breath of fresh air, because there's always guys like referencing bar fights and stuff like that, but you were a legitimate Vietnam veteran. And this was the thing that got me, because I'm 55 years of age now, so I don't want to age. I don't know, there's probably a term now called age shaming, right? But the year I was born was when you were in Vietnam on your tour. And that just blew me away, because you touched upon it in the initial interview. And if you want to know the truth, I'd always wanted to know where you'd gone. And, I know, I mean, in the public zeitgeisty thing of martial arts. But the thing was, in my research, I found out about your book, Some Gave All, and I was while you were exactly that, and your whole story blew me away. Could you explain, because a very good jumping in point for guys who are watching this is, some people can talk about their childhood, but I've never ever spoke to anyone who actually raised themselves.
Well, actually, I have two new books out that you maybe haven't read. It's One is American Fighter, which basically takes you back to my childhood when I was raised. Yeah, kind of like the story you're wanting me to talk about now, where I was, given up at birth and adopted at 10 years old. I was homeless again at 14 years old because the man that adopted me was Oliver Lane, and he gave me his name. But he suddenly died unexpectedly when his lung collapsed at 32 years old. I was 14 at the time. So shortly after that, I was homeless because he was dead, and my biological mother moved away to Cleveland, Ohio, which was 5 hours from where I live. So I just started doing odd jobs and putting myself through high school. I developed a rock band. I played music. I'm a drummer. So you may have seen some of my videos online.
Yeah.
And I was really going nowhere. I got into shooting pool, hustling drunks, things like that. Things weren't going well. So when the war was coming, I got a draft notice. At the same time, I was pretty much homeless. I'd lost my job as well, and so I joined the Marine Corps. And the people around me and my family, nobody knew where I went. I just disappeared. So after boot camp, which I was gone for 3 months, I come home in my uniform. I contacted no one. They didn't know I went into the Marine Corps or what happened to me. So I volunteered to go to Vietnam to be in the infantry, and that's what I got. I got an MOS, which is a military occupational. What they do is equate your MOS to your civilian occupancy. So my infantry, I was trained in small arms, explosions, and different types of small arms fire. So in Marine Corps, I was mostly a machine gunner. In the Marine Corps, I was mostly a machine gunner in Vietnam, but I did other duties too, with the mortars, rockets, explosives, and things like that. But I was there 300 and some days, and I probably saw combat more than 100 of those days, and was wounded several times. And all of my squad was highly decorated. So you read about them, and some gave it all.
Yeah.
And actually, I know Chuck Norris endorsed it, and Chuck even said in his preview and his review of it, he'd like to see it be made into a movie, but it would be made into a big budget movie because of all the war scenes. However, my new book, Code of Steel, which is about my police career, is being made into a movie in Warsaw, Poland with Netflix coming up later this year.
Wow. The story that got me was the fact that you were dropped in Danang, put on a helicopter, and then literally it was like 90 days. Literally, you had basic training, and you were saying, I think I've got this right. Your buddy beside you was the Greek, and he could barely speak English, right? So how does a young man get his head around that? So can you explain a little bit about that for me, please?
Yeah, what you read was the first night, actually the second day we were in Vietnam, we were assigned our unit, and we got all of our gear and everything, and we were told to report. We call it a tarmac, but it's where the helicopters land. So we're out in the middle of nowhere, really, but they've got middle things down that the helicopters can land, and there was helicopters everywhere. And I didn't know it at the time, but there was more than 5,000 Marines going on this mission called Meade River, and you can read about it in the history books and also Google it. It's Operation Meade River. So it launched in November of 1968, and the Greek and I, who we were in boot camp together, were together on that mission all the way down to the same squad, same foxhole. I mean, we were on the helicopter and we were going into this LZ at 4 o'clock in the morning. It was totally dark. And LZ means a landing zone. So the helicopter is trying to land us in the jungle, but they can't get all the way on the ground. As the helicopter is going down, all the enemy from below is shooting at us with rockets, and bullets are coming into the helicopter. So the door opens and the machine gunner says, "Everybody out." So I jump into the night, not knowing how high we were, because other helicopters were being shot down. So we just jumped into the night, and we hit the ground and ended up together. As we crawled off into some elephant leaves and kind of was hiding because we didn't know, we couldn't see anybody, we couldn't hear anybody, we didn't know where to go. Nobody told us nothing, so we just kind of waited it out till daylight come and kind of fought our way back to the friendly people and found our unit. I mean, we got punished for being lost, but we had no choice. I mean, once we hit the ground, yeah.
Well, the thing is, talk about being thrown in at the deep end. We're going to skip a little bit forward. How did you get into law enforcement after you left the Marine Corps?
Well, as I said a little bit earlier, the guy that adopted me was a police officer, and he had met my biological mother, who I'd never lived with at the time, when I was 10 years old. So when he hooked up with my biological mother, I become a little bit sickly. I had asthma and things, and she was a nurse and he was a cop. They got married and they wanted me to live with them simply because I was sick and she wanted to take care of me. So I ended up staying with him. So eventually he adopted me, gave me his name. Like I said, for 4 years, everything was fine. And then he comes home on Christmas Eve of 1963 and dies in the floor and just in front of me. He just dropped straight down.
Wow.
With no notice. Oh. And like I say, he was only 32 years old at the time. So after several years, after a year or so went by, my mother met somebody else and she moved away. So I didn't want to change my school, my friends, and I said, I'm staying back. So I stayed back, and since then I've been on my own. So I promised him, even though he had died, that when I would go to the Marine Corps, because he had been in the Marine Corps as well. And I used his image as a role model for me to be somebody. So I said, I'm going to go in the Marine Corps, and if I live and come out, I'll be a police officer, just like you. I made him that promise, even though he was dead, but at the casket, when I was talking to him, I made him the promise. And so that's how I become a police officer. Actually, I was hired as a police officer 2 weeks after I got back from Vietnam. So I had very little time to depressed, because the first 5 years when I was a police officer, you'll read about that in my new book, Code of Steel, I was still at war with myself and still at war with the people. The enemy this time was the people on the streets and the crooks instead of the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese army. So, if you read Code of Steel, it's very compelling.
Well, no, I'm definitely going to, because what really piqued my interest was you touched on you touched on the PTSD and working with Mission 22, and like nowadays that's it. Like we have it in the UK. We have Reorg, and we have guys like Tom Hardy, the actor, championing it, and those, especially in America. I liked what you said in one of your interviews, where you said there was no parade for me. That you had to order your medals from the Marine Corps. They weren't conferred onto you. And I like the way that you explained it. You said that it was almost like an embarrassment. So it wasn't like 1945 where everyone came back. It was because everyone had assumed that they'd lost. So if you don't mind, can you explain, your thoughts when you came back into the country?
Yeah, we unfortunately had to come back on the USS Iwo Jima, which is an aircraft carrier. So what I thought, when I got the orders, I was coming home because I was having some troop withdrawal. So I was one of those people. I only had a few days left anyway. I had to go aboard this ship, and the news crew was there filming us climbing up the ropes on the side of this aircraft carrier, which was gigantic. And I was so weak from malaria and the heat and being sick. I only weighed 120 pounds when I come out of the jungle. And I'd lost 65 pounds since I'd been over there. And I was almost not strong enough to climb up the side of the ship. So it took us 30 days to fly. There was 500 Marines, and there was like 5,000 sailors on this boat, and we didn't get along with each other. So we ended up being in the brig. We ended up fighting each other, in 30 days on that ship. I mean, it was horrendous. So when we flew into San Diego, there was no parade. There was no news cameras. They just got us off and put us in cattle cars and took us off to make a decision with us. We had to go into a psychological debriefing for about 5 days to see if we were suicidal or homicidal before they'd let us out into the public in San Diego. And we had an option to re-enlist and be promoted or get an early discharge. I knew I had this police job probably waiting for me, so I went ahead and got a discharge, went home, and become a cop. So yeah, there's no parades. I didn't have any medals like you said. I had them order them 20 some years later. I was ashamed to even put them up. I didn't tell anybody about all the medals that I was authorized. I mean, they're here in my office now, and I proudly wear them. And when I do interviews now, I wear the ribbons and things on my suit and things like that. But we didn't lose a war. There was nothing to be ashamed about. It was a political thing that went away, but every battle that we were in, the Marine Corps was in, that I was in, we won. I mean, they were afraid of us. I mean, I'm 19 years old and 20 years old. I look around me, everybody's 19 or 20 years old. We're young kids. We're poor. We come from poor families in America. The rich kids, they got deferrals. I mean, we were all rich, poor whites, poor blacks, poor Hispanics. That's who were fighting this war. And we were expendable. It's kind of like the Stallone's movies, The Expendables. We were expendable because we didn't matter. We didn't matter.
But it's very funny. It's very funny. It's like it became a bit of a meme and a joke for a while. But then if you listen to the lyrics, "Fortunate Son" by Creedence Clearwater Revival, John Fogerty nailed it in that song. But I ain't no senator's son, and it was like, everyone. It's the whole thing where it's like, if you got enough money, you could get out of it. Now, if you don't mind, because Danny, I'd love to talk to you about martial arts, but what really fascinated me when I was doing my research with you was the fact that you were really, really honest, and I actually loved it. As I said, I'm not going to lie, I was a bit of a fanboy to start off with. But the more I researched you and the more I read about you, the more I loved it, right? Because you were brutally honest with the fact that you were able to stave off nearly all of the really, really malevolent thoughts and anything to do with PTSD while you were still able to train, you were still able to work on the streets as a copper. But then the minute you weren't able to do that, you said it hit you like it was almost like a brick wall, and if you don't mind, what age were you when this kicked in? Or do you think you were just always fighting it and it was in the back of your head? The malevolent thoughts and the dark thoughts.
That's a good question. I mean, I don't think PTSD was actually recognized until I got home in late 1969, December 69. The VA, the Veterans Administration, didn't really recognize our problem until about 1984 and give it a name. Before, up to that point, I think it was called combat fatigue and things like that.
Yes.
Where people come out of the war zone. But, I use the excitement, the adrenaline rush as a cop to fuel my appetite for violence. I mean, if there wasn't violence on the street, I would create it. I mean, I was out of control, and I talk about that in my new book. I mean, if somebody would say something to us, we would just, beat them up or something like that, or take them on a little trip. And, we did interrogation techniques. On my police department, in my recruit class, I think there were 7 of us that were Vietnam veterans. So when we hit the street in our city, I mean, we took care of business. Nobody moved unless we had it. So I was suffering from post-traumatic stress. I drink coconut rum, which I got in Vietnam a lot for the villagers, and I'd have to drink. I didn't even drink on duty just to keep my nerves settled down so I could function. And when I met Korean master Sako Kong, who come to our town in Taekwondo, I started training with him. It wasn't long though. I had a key to the gym because I was dedicated, and I would work out 4 or 5 hours and sweat just to try to be able to sleep when I went home. I found out that martial arts become a therapy for me to release all this anger and all this frustration and all these hostilities, and also try to deal with the atrocities. So, I still live with that. I've battled post-traumatic stress since 1970, so that would be 54 years. It's almost killed me several times. I've had intrusive thoughts to take my life hundreds of times over the years, and that's natural. I've been teaching against it. I've had a lot of psychological help, and it's caused me a lot of grief. And there's not a day goes by that I don't suffer with it. But I'm still a survivor, and I try to help people get through it. 2008. So yeah, it's I also found out after we got back, we were exposed to these chemicals over there. So I'm an Agent Orange survivor. not only post-traumatic stress, but you have to deal with, like I say, the flashbacks and all the stuff, and
Yes.
they want to put you on medication, and so I've not only been fighting, the atrocities and things that we did in war, but the things I did as a police officer. But at the same time, with the inner thoughts of myself, the biggest enemy is me. And I'm married to a wonderful lady that understands me and live with me and gets me help, and she sees those triggers in me, and I'm pretty much right now, except for my heart condition, I'm pretty much medicine free. And I've survived a massive heart attack. I survived a stroke, and I'm back teaching and traveling and still moving. So the last 5 years, I've been a little bit in seclusion, recovering from this heart attack and a stroke that I had to get back to where I was.
People bandy around the term warrior, but there's like literally, without making light of any of it, Danny, you could have like a country and western album written about you. The amount of things that you've gone through, it's like everything. It's like how did you get into martial arts? Because that's what's getting me, because I got into it because I was bullied and I was scared of violence. But by the time you got into martial arts, I don't think there was much about violence that you haven't seen. So how did you get into it? Was it the duality of the yin and the yang, or what was it that appealed to you, or was it just the workout?
Well, those are all good questions. Of course, I didn't know what martial arts was in 1968 when I went into the Marine Corps. I never heard of the word karate. There wasn't any studios in my town. But, in the Marine Corps, they taught us hand-to-hand combat, which is how to choke people out and stab people with a knife and, things like that. And that was basically the jiu-jitsu program. They didn't call it that. They just called it hand-to-hand combat, which I really had to use. If you read my book, which you say, and some gave it all, there was an incident where I had to kill a guy, another enemy soldier with my knife, because he was on top of me with explosives. Yeah. But anyway, once I got into the police department, I come out, and then there was an instructor in the state police academy that I went to, and he was a great big guy, and he was teaching jiu-jitsu, which is joint locks and come-alongs and how to arrest people and things like that. In fact, he heard about 10 of us and had us in the hospital. He was so rough. So once I was on the street, I was still small. Like I said, when I got back and out of the Marine Corps, I was 120 pounds. So I had to gain 30 pounds just to pass the weight limit to be hired as a police officer, because the minimum was 150 pounds. So wow. I was eating everything fattening for months to pass the physical exam to get on there. So, everything is kind of God driven. You don't know when you're going to cross somebody's path that's going to change your life. So, like I said, I was in a rock and roll band, so I stopped by this pizza shop that my manager owned. He owned his pizza shop, and also he owned a nightclub where all the bands would play, rock and roll for the college students. I stopped by to see him one night, and I was in uniform, and just it wasn't by chance. I guess there are divine interventions, they call them. There was a Korean guy sitting there. He had been just brought to America to teach Taekwondo. And the guy that had the pizza shop introduced me to him. He said his son was taking Taekwondo with him. I didn't know what Taekwondo was, but we did do operations with Koreans in the Korean Rock Division in Vietnam. So I knew that they did a lot of kicks and studied a lot of self-defense. So he invited me to come to his studio and train with him, which I did shortly after we met. And then I become one of his newer students here in America, and it wasn't within a year I was running his studio, and within the first year I bought out the studio and opened 2 other studios. So I become a quick black belt. I had 3 studios, and so I was doing the duties as a cop, and I had 3 martial arts studios. Well, he and I were in business together for about 8 years, and I wasn't making the money I thought that I needed to, and it was a business decision. It didn't have anything to do with him teaching me. I'd won 3 national titles, a 75, 76, 77 U.S. title, lightweight. And I also was a professional kickboxer. I was rated top 10 in the kickboxing. And so I had a career ahead of me. So there was something told me I had to leave. So it was like leaving home. I left him, and it was bittersweet. They were very bitter because I left the Korean organization. And so I went around competing and training with different people around the country. And I stopped by a studio in Virginia Beach, Virginia, called the Chuck Norris Karate Studio. And of course, I knew who Chuck was. I mean, he was in Black Belt magazine, and everybody kind of knew who Chuck was. And so I went in to see how the business was run. And this gentleman there named Bill Maher, he was a businessman. He turned Chuck Studios down there into $1 million business. And he ran them professionally. So he gave me all these, the way he was doing things. He said, look, Chuck's going to be here next week. He's going to do the premiere of the Octagon. And I said, well, I have to work. I can't come back because I live 9-hour drive from Virginia Beach. So he said, I'll tell Chuck to call you. He said, I think you'd be really good with his organization. Well, I never did expect to hear from him again or Chuck. But one day, it wasn't probably 2 or 3 weeks later, the phone rang. We didn't have cell phones.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
And so I picked it up. He said, is this Danny? I said, yeah. He said, well, this is Chuck Norris. I said, yeah, right. Who is this really? I thought he was pranking me. He said, no, I've heard a lot of good things about you. I want you to come to Los Angeles and work out with me and look at my court organization. He said, we have a black belt test, at a certain date, and you come out. That's how we hooked up eventually. I got on the plane against my better judgment, never wanting to fly again because of my bad experiences. But for Chuck Norris, I said, I'll go there. So actually, there's a video on YouTube of our first workout. It's old 8mm. I narrated. So if you want me to, I can send you the link of him and I working out. Him and I working out that first day in 1980. There's a video of that. It's really good.
Well, it's bizarre because I did explain to my wife. I said it's one of Chuck Norris's best friends, and she was like, "Really?" And you know what? Wives are quite funny. But, it's like myself and Will. We had a great adventure once with Jean-Claude Van Damme. We had an evening with him, and I explained to my wife. Will's rolling his eyes here, and my wife's like, "You can't be Jean-Claude Van Damme." And I went, "No, really?" And they just went, "Is this really Chuck Norris?" And I went, "Yeah, the real Chuck Norris." So this was 1980 when you met Chuck.
Yeah, it was in November 1980. He had just done the Octagon. He had already done Breaker and those, and he just done the Octagon with Richard Norton. You're talking about Jean-Claude. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the picture of me and Chuck and Jean-Claude, but there's I had it restored, so I can send you that. In 1984, I would go to California and stay with Chuck for weeks at his house. We would train, and everybody would come in. Richard Norton would be there, Bob Wall, Howard Jackson, Bill Wallace. I mean, everybody come to Chuck's house to work out with us, including me. I mean, I would fly out there and take off work just to spend some time with him. So I meet this guy, and it's Jean-Claude Van Damme. He hadn't even played. He hadn't made Bloodsport yet in the early 1984. And so for weeks we were out there, we spent time together. Jean-Claude would drive Chuck's limo around with us in the back of it. And there's a bunch of pictures I can't find, but we went to Knott's Berry Farm and amusement park together. We spent a lot of time, and Jean-Claude and I would help Chuck try to get into the full split because Chuck never could get into the full split till he met Jean-Claude. And we did all these stretching routines. Actually, the stretching routines I did are in Combat Magazine that you may have seen. And so we were stretching a lot and doing weightlifting and doing all these kicks, and so there's a really nice picture. I had it restored of Jean-Claude and me and Chuck right after we worked out. I don't think anybody. There's probably been. I don't know if anybody's actually worked out with Jean-Claude and Chuck at the same time. I mean, they've worked out with each one of them, but in the same room at the same time, privately. I don't think anybody else has done that except me. And so I didn't know at the time. I didn't know at the time.
But that's amazing. So, Danny, in the course of the interview, we've talked about, your book, Some Gave All. And in the course of my research, I didn't realize how many books you'd actually written.
I actually wrote a book in 1994 called Black Silk Pajamas. It sounds like a sexy book, but it's actually Black Silk Pajamas is what the Viet Cong wore in Vietnam. They wore the black silk uniforms. And it was an autobiography of the First Lady of South Vietnam had contacted me And she had this story she wanted to tell. So it's about her and her husband, how they she was a undercover agent for the French government who was in Vietnam before the United States was there. So she worked undercover, kind of like a CIA agent. She eventually led her life to meet the prime minister of Vietnam and end up marrying him. So when the communists overrun the country, they were in prison, both of them. They were separated in prison. So the whole book is about her trying to get off out of Vietnam on the boats and become one of the boat people. So she tried about like 18 times to escape, and the communists kept catching her. So the Black Silk Pajamas is about her story, about what happened before the Americans got there and how we kind of crossed paths at one time in a bar in South Danang, and how she eventually escaped with her kids to get to America and be reunited with her husband, who had been in prison in Hanoi. And they ended up owning a convenience store in Houston, Texas. So, Black Silk Pajamas is about her story. And so, then I started writing the books. I started writing it just like I did taking martial arts for therapy. After I had a massive heart attack, which I didn't know was coming on, almost died. On May the 10th of 2018, I almost died. In fact, my wife took me to the Veterans Hospital, and I laid there for 5 hours having a heart attack before they could get me to another hospital to get somebody to operate on me. As a result of that, I almost died. And then 5 weeks later after that, I had a stroke with blood clots in my brain that paralyzed me. So, part of my therapy of overcoming open heart surgery, where they cut your chest open and take your heart out literally and put it on a ventilator. They strip other veins out of your legs like they did me, and rebuild these veins, that are clean. I had two blockages. I had two of my blockages were 99%. One was 100, one was 99. And just 2 weeks before that, I was teaching a seminar in Cleveland with Bill Wallace. I was fighting. My wife said, "You're sweating a lot. Are you feeling okay?" I said, "Yeah, I feel great." But slowly after that, day by day, I started feeling a little bit different. So, it materialized into a full heart attack. So anyway, I started writing down. I've been writing before, but I started writing seriously. Some gave it all for therapy. As God would have it, I had this online class going where you could achieve your black belt if you train with me a little bit virtually online. And this guy started studying my videos. And unknowingly to me, he was a successful writer, a very well-known writer. And he was did corporate lectures and things like that. So his name is Mark Bowser. So Mark decided to tell my story through me, and Some Gave It All. So I spent several years writing my memoirs and going back to my old squad and reconnecting with them. And actually, the picture that's in Some Gave It All, the machine gunner right here is me. This picture was discovered 50 years later.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, this is a Greek. This was us just a few years ago. And he had these pictures he had taken of me in his photo album. So all these pictures, including me in the machine gun pit and me in the elephant leaves right there getting ready to shoot. This is on Mead River right after we got jumped off the helicopter. He had a little Kodak Instamatic camera, and he snapped these pictures and sent them back to his girlfriend. So 50 years later, after I'm writing this book, these pictures, these pictures all surface for the book. So that's a miracle in itself.
And then your latest book, what drove you to write that?
In Some Gave It All, it only brought you to where I come home. I didn't know if the Greek was dead or not.
Yeah.
And it was just about my Vietnam things. But, the Some Gave It All was actually written about 20 days of me being in the hospital when I had this viral infection to my brain. And I walked away from home and was almost run over by an Amtrak train. And I didn't know who I was and so forth. So that's the way Some Gave It All comes out, because the whole book is told from the hospital bed of me, what's going on in my mind when these neurologists are trying to find out why I couldn't remember my kids, I couldn't remember where I was, why I had been losing weight, why I was so sick, and I had this viral infection in my brain that they couldn't identify, but they finally admitted it must have come from Vietnam, the jungles of Vietnam, where my brain started swelling, in 2006. So that was 36 years later after I got back from Vietnam. This viral infection attacked in my brain, and this whole book is told from the hospital bed about my story unfolds. I'm laying in the bed unconscious, and the doctor is trying to save my life. That's how some it all comes about.
If there was ever a good case for divine intervention, for having a reason to do it, that would be the one. And Code of Steel, that's about your law enforcement career. Right.
Yeah, it starts right off like 2 weeks after I got back. I discovered the Greek was alive. Even though he'd been listed as killed in action, and I thought he was dead. I went to Cleveland, Ohio to pay respects to his family and take his personal belongings I had with me. And come to find out, amazingly, he was alive. He was in Japan, and he survived the being shot and blown up the third time. And so that's all part of that. So the Code of Steel starts out with me being a rookie cop and being, still at war with myself and on the streets of America and going through all these dangerous situations every night and all these calls with my brothers. So the Code of Steel is this unbelievable bond that you have with other people like the Marines and cops. We all have this brotherhood. The Code of Steel is that unbreakable and unbelievable code that we have with each other. Yeah. And so, just like you, there was a guy in Warsaw, Poland named Mike Zawoski. And he's a movie producer, and he's produced 3 movies for Netflix. Well, when he was a kid, he got my video somehow and was studying my videos when he was 14 years old. And so he knew of me. And so when he saw that my book come out and he read it, he wanted to do a movie with me. So right now I have it under option with him, with his production company, and he's a producer with Netflix. And right now we're in the process of getting approved for funding and maybe to do the movie later this year or next year. So even though the part will be it'll be filmed in Warsaw, it'll be based on my character and based on some true events, but it'll be a fictitious character at this point. And it's called Code of Steel, called Night Justice. So in my book I always say nothing ever good happens in the nighttime, especially after midnight.
Well, that's one of my classic lines. Nothing good happens after 12 o'clock. Anywhere, even when you're in bed, nothing good. As a 55-year-old man, if I have to get out of bed after midnight, it's not going to be good. There's nothing good happening. So, if you don't mind, there's one thing that I really wanted to ask you, and we can wrap up on this. But as I said, for the guys who are watching this, if you get the chance, I hope you really enjoy my interview. But there's some great interviews on YouTube with you, right? And the ones that have really got me is the fact that if there was anybody on the planet who could question their faith for some of the stuff that's happened to them, it would be you, sir. And your faith has been so important to you. Can you explain just quickly how you've managed to keep it? Because there's a lot of guys who turn their back on their faith. And bear in mind, I should say, I'm an Irish lapsed Catholic, right? So I have struggled with faith for years. But when I see people that have got an unshakable belief, I can only admire it, because it's something that I'm still trying to look for. And as I've said before, when I need God, I sometimes he doesn't listen to me, but then again, I don't speak to him unless I need him. Do you understand what I mean? So can you explain to me, how is your faith not being shook?
That's another good question. You have really great questions. My grandmother raised me the first 10 years out in the country, and there was real small little country churches. I mean, there would maybe be 20 people in there. She would make me go, when I was 4, 5, 6 years old. And, they would sing, and I didn't really think much about it at the time. She baptized me and saved me and stuff. But, once you reach the bottom, like at the time I joined the Marine Corps, I was at the very bottom. I mean, I was getting ready to rob this guy just so I could eat. It was a different I had a difference of either robbing this guy, maybe going to prison for robbery and stuff, or just walk away and change my life. And you can read about that in my book, I think, Code of Steel, where I'm in the alley getting ready to rob this old man of his money just so I can pay my rent and have some food. And I was at the very bottom. And then all of a sudden, the guy was so nice to me. He said, you know, anytime you need something, you know, I will always help you. You've always been nice to me. And I started crying, and I walked down the street. You know, had been drinking, and that night I decided to change my life. So when I went when I went to the Marine Corps, you know, of course they give you a Bible, and you know, most of us, about 75% of the Marines were, I think, Christians, and so forth. But when you are dropped in the jungle, like in the front of my book, and you're surrounded by all these people, you have overwhelming odds, and you know, you think you're going to be dying. You look to your left and you look to your right, and people are dropping beside you. There's bullets flying everywhere. And so you decide you don't have control over nothing. I mean, God has control over what's going to happen to you, and you stop worrying about it. You stop being afraid after a while. You say, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen, because people are dying and you have no control. You're shooting back. You're trying to take cover. But after a while, I stopped being worried about it. You know, in my book, Summary of It All, on May 31st of 1969, I dreamed I was going to die. And so when we were in combat that night, I stood up in the middle of the compound and with bullets flying everywhere and said, you know, if it's your will, then take me. And then knowing that this kid next to me was the one who got shot and got killed. And I think he took the bullet for me. God saved me and took the kid named Parker that was beside me in the foxhole. So yeah, the same thing as a cop. You know, when I go through the door, I didn't worry about it. I wasn't afraid. People think I was being reckless, but I had him as my backup, and then I had martial arts as my backup. So I did things that was probably off the books and probably unauthorized, because I didn't always have backup. We didn't have backup in Vietnam. I didn't have backup as a cop. I depended on myself and the Lord's will to get me through all the dangerous situations. So I know, you know, in 2018, when I had the heart attack, you know, my wife is very, very religious, and she's showed me and taught me so much about how to accept the Lord and just put it into His hands. And I think 8 hours I was in surgery, never trying to, you know, save my life. And you know, we realize you don't have control over it. If it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And you just kind of, and it's an easier way to live that way. You have more faith, you know. So, you know, I'm on borrowed time. I'm 75 years old, and I've done so much and so forth. And I like to give back. So I wrote a lot of these books to leave my legacy to the kids, grandkids, and people who know me. I wanted to honor the other Marines, the other cops I served with, if you read American Fighter, which is my third book we haven't talked about, it has my whole journey with Chuck Norris in there. It has my whole journey with Chuck Norris in there, and the other martial arts people.
Well, that's will be the great stopping off point now. Yeah. For part one, and we'll be able to follow that up in part two. But I really do mean this, Danny. Will can back me up on this. We have literally interviewed hundreds of people, but trust me, out of everyone I've ever interviewed, really, I think this has been one of the best ever. It's just when when I think you can't tell me anything more to surprise me, then you just come out with it. I actually mean this from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much for your time, and just. You know when they say sometimes you shouldn't meet your heroes? This isn't one of those times, my friend. But thank you so much, Danny. Before we go, if you want to get your books, where's the best place to get them?
Well, if they want an autograph, they can go to my website, DannyLane.com. There's a link to my shopping cart, and they'll come directly to me. And I sign a personal message to each one, and you know, make them out to them personally. You can get them as cheap from me as you can on Amazon. But if they want to ship free, and you know, if they need them in a hurry, go to Amazon.com. All my books are on there. But DannyLane.com, they get an autographed personal message, you know, from me directly.
Well, I'd rather give the money to Danny Lane than to give it to Jeff Bezos. We'll catch you. We'll catch you for part two, Danny. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
I look forward to it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Social Podcast Network.
With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.